Okay, let's get into the painting. Okay, let's do that, maybe just a little. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to recreate another painting by one of my favorite artists of all time, an artist that is hugely famous on the other side of the planet, in India and throughout the Middle East. An artist who's probably not as well known here in Canada and North America and Western Europe as definitely he should be, although he is one of the few Indian artists to have achieved global recognition. So we're going to be looking at the art of M.F. Husain, or Maqbool Fida Husain, who is, and this is the painting that I want to recreate today. It's called The Spirit of India and was completed about 16 years before he died, around that period of time. And this is a period of time where he was making increasingly controversial artworks. So we'll get into why he's so controversial. Probably one of the most controversial artists that we've looked at over the past almost 142 episodes so far. So why is he controversial? Let's take a look here. Before we get into that, I want to let you know that there's an outline I did of this image, and you can print it off from the Dropbox folder. So let's take a quick look here. There's, in the video description below, you'll see a whole bunch of, well, there's a whole bunch of folders and links, but one of them is for a Dropbox folder. And in that Dropbox folder, you'll see there's 100 or more subfolders. All of these are images by, like, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa right in here, Salvador Dali. We looked at some other Indian artists. These are Sikh artists. Today we're going to be looking at a Muslim artist. I'm trying to think who would be... there's a lot of artists in here. I would say that the artist maybe closest to Husain in terms of work is going to be the artist we're going to focus on all of next week, which is Pablo Picasso. In fact, many people have called Husain Picasso of India, or India's Picasso, because of maybe a little bit because of the way that the work looks, but I think even more so the fact of his daring and iconoclastic nature. Maybe before we launch right into the painting, I'll also let you know that there's a private Facebook group just for people who are watching and painting along with me. That's cool. So here's Maria's version of the Talaratore painting we did just last week, and I love how you added your own little spin to it. Very cool. I'm not going to go through everything here because there's lots of images. I encourage you to join it because it's a great, super supportive group of people who are painting just like you and trying to get better and better and better. Every month or so, I do a feedback episode where I take a look at all the art that's on the Facebook group and give some feedback to help improve paintings, or more often than not, just some good old congratulations because people are getting better and better and better. Remember, most of the people who are in that group are people who had very little experience painting or hadn't painted in a long time and are now getting back into it. And so there's lots of people who are probably like you, kind of thinking, oh man, I wish I was painting a little bit more, incorporating some creativity into my daily routine. So let's look at M.F. Husain. So this is generally how most people refer to him, although his full name is Maqbool Fida Husain. Let me see. He, like Taib Mehta and Sousa and Raza, who we painted just yesterday, right? Or a couple days ago, right? We made a painting of his. He, Husain, was one of the founders of the Bombay Progressive Art Group, or PAG. in 1947, just a few months after the partition of India into India and Pakistan. And we'll talk about why that happened and his involvement in it as we go here. What else? Let's take a look at his biography right before we jump into the making of the painting. So he was born into the Islamic faith. He was the Sulaimani Bora is like a fairly small, 70,000 members, mostly in Yemen, but a small number of whom live in India. And so growing up in a very small community in India, I think gave him this sense of being a bit of an outsider, or maybe not a part of a larger community or the dominant community, definitely a minority within India. And I think that is something that influenced his art, because as we can see later on, he becomes very controversial. And I think he felt kind of like being sort of not a part of a number of different communities made him feel like, in some ways, both like restrictive, but also a lot of freedom to explore as an artist. So, you know, his father was a businessman. His father wanted him to go into business, but he was quite successful even as a young person, making posters and billboards for the Bollywood film industry. And he himself made films throughout his life, some of which were so controversial that they were withdrawn from film festivals and cinemas. And some of them they're mostly very difficult to find. I wasn't able to get my hands on any of the movies he made because of various different protests that had occurred. Another thing that I think is a pretty monumental moment in his life is that he was selected by Pablo Picasso for the Sao Paulo Biennial in 1971, and Picasso selected, I can't remember exactly how many artists, but it was like 5 or 6 major artists from around the world that really people might not have been familiar with at the time, right? And now we're more used to seeing art and actors, writers from all over the world on our bookstore shelves and on the news, and etc., in magazines. But back in the 70s, looking and appreciating artists from other cultures was really quite new, right? We tended to kind of think that all the great art was made in Europe, maybe in New York, and then the rest of us, even here in Canada, and especially on the West Coast, were sort of lesser than, right? And never mind people in India, Pakistan, China, etc. And so I think that was, you know, for all the criticism that Picasso gets, and we'll talk about that again next week when we look at Picasso, he did use his influence and celebrity to help promote other artists who certainly deserved that recognition. So we'll talk about all of the controversy that he courted throughout mostly the last few decades of his life as we get into the painting here. I mean, like, just this hundreds of lawsuits in connections with his so-called obscene art, right? So this is someone who did not shy away from controversy, for sure. And so much so that he left India in, I think, 2005 and spent the last 5 to 10 years, I can't remember exactly, living in Qatar, eventually renouncing his Indian citizenship because of the violent threats that were directed against him by various different people. Right. Just lastly here, how about in 2010, the Jordanian Royal Islamic Strategic Studies Center named him one of the 500 most influential Muslims, which that's a pretty big deal, I think, to be recognized as one of, you know, the most influential people from within your culture or faith, right? So let's lots of links here. let me see if we can just take a quick look at some of his other art, so just we have an idea of how the painting that we're working on today kind of fits into his overall career. As we look at these, you can see that he really likes color. He just like Raza, who we painted the other day, right? Again, this painting we made just on, was it Thursday? Every day's bleeding. And pretty much all of the artists who are part of the progressive art group were really into color and being very expressive with color, which is something like India as a whole. If you've like the color of the clothing, of the traditions, India is a very colorful country, and the art that he would have learned when he was growing up, the dominant art in India at the time, was European influence. Now, we have to remember that India was a colony, or was colonized by the British, and they imposed their way of life and their way of looking at the world on every aspect of Indian society, including the arts, right? So traditionally, artists were learning how to paint just like British people living in England, right? And then they would transport that knowledge to India, and young Indian artists would learn how to paint India in the style of white European artists, right? So after the partition, after India achieved independence from England in August 1947, there was this sort of awakening, mostly by artists like Husain and Raza and Taib Mehta, Sousa, who said, like, you know, if we're going to be an independent country, we've got to have our own independent art, right? And so they turned away from this realist painting that had been very popular and that was taught to them, towards more abstraction, more modernist influences. You know, people will talk about a kind of a cubist kind of style or technique when we talk about Husain. I can see what people are talking about, but it's very loosely cubist. I didn't read an interview where he addressed that, but I don't know if he would call himself a cubist. I don't know if he would have seen his work in that particular way. I think it's the distortion of the body that I guess has a kind of cubist influence, but yeah. So so another thing here, actually, we'll just mention a lot of his paintings also have a narrative component. They're stories of India or of Islam, and so he's painted pictures like, here's Mother Teresa. There was another series of paintings that I wanted to do, but would have been much more elaborate, and I think I saw this up here, and I've actually already done the drawings, and I was going to, let me see. So this here is basically the story of Gandhi's life, and I was going to make this, again, I've done the drawings, the outlines. I'm all prepped to do this episode, but just because of just being a little bit busy, we're not going to get to it now, but it is on my radar to do in the future, because I love this. This was made around the same time that Sir Richard Attenborough did the film on Gandhi, starring Ben Kingsley, and Husain made this suite of paintings. It's called, like, some people refer to it as the Attenborough panels, because I think some people say Husain wanted to sell it to Richard Attenborough after, but that didn't happen. So, but it is, you know, again, the cycle of Gandhi's life. I think here's Gandhi being assassinated, and then sort of transcending his earthly body. Okay, so let's get into the painting. As I said, I've done an outline for this image, so I'm going to share with you how that process was achieved. I'm going to blow this up here. I'm going to just briefly talk while I play this video. So I'm using a 9x12 sized canvas, and you can see I'm going to tape this printout, which you can take, print out on your photocopier or printer on generally thinner paper works best, although I tend to use thick paper just because I like heavier cardstock for some weird reason, which makes it a little bit more difficult to get darker lines. And then I'm going to use some carbon paper here. And you can see I've used this carbon paper many times. You could see Andy Warhol's Campbell's soup can in there from when we did the Campbell's soup can, our Warhol episode, maybe 9-10 months ago. And so then I'm just going to trace over this image once I get the camera sorted here. And I'm just going to go over all the lines here. Not absolutely every single line. There's a few small ones that I don't use. And I also did this line right down the middle. Now, I wasn't able to find out why that line is there. I don't know if that was two canvases that are like a diptych that are kind of joined together, or if it's in the original painting. But I'm going to put that line in the painting as well. So now we've got our image traced out onto the canvas, and it should look a little bit like this, right? So now let's take a look at the painting itself and just think about how we want to approach the artwork. So if I look at this image, generally what I like to do when I begin a painting is apply a coat of paint over top of the entire surface of the painting as what we call an imprimatura, which is like the first coat of paint. And it looks like Husain did exactly that in this painting. And it does actually, my original my thought was immediately to paint this kind of lime green over top of the background. But now that I look at it more closely, I see that actually he's painted that separately, because we can see little gaps of other, like either a white or an eggshell color underneath here. So I think I'm going to go back to what I normally do, which is to paint put a yellow ground down. So let's do that. So I'm going to take my yellow paint. This is right out of the tube. This is just when after painting for a year, I've had like a couple of tubes, and there's a little bit left in the bottom of the tube that I can't squeeze out, so I just cut it open, use a little thing-mabob, well, you know what it is, a spatula to scrape all that extra paint so it doesn't just go into the garbage. And I have jars full of paint that would otherwise just go down the sink or whatever, right? So I'm going to put this warm yellow on here and mix a little bit of water in there. And I got a bit of water on the painting. And then I'm just going to stir this up. This is really the only time I ever use water when I'm making an acrylic painting, except to clean my brushes, of course. But I think the greatest mistake that acrylic painters make is constantly putting water into their acrylic paint. You can certainly do it. There's no law saying that you can't do it, but the thing is I think you're not going to be as happy with the results as you might expect them to be. And if you've been doing it out of habit or routine for a long time, if instead of using water you use a medium, like just literally matte medium or gloss medium, which is acrylic paint without any pigment, I think you'll find you get closer to the result you want, which is probably that you want the paint to be a little bit more fluid. Because maybe if you're using like what I'm using here is what we call heavy body acrylics. And heavy body acrylics are thick acrylic paint. And thick acrylic paint is great for making big, thick paintings, but not so good for doing thin details. So if you want to thin the painting down, or the paint down, rather than using water, which literally destroys the paint, it's reducing the bonds between all of the pigments, is to mix another material in there. And so matte medium is just acrylic paint without any color, without any pigment in it. So it dries about 99% clear. Okay. So the reason why I'm putting down this yellow is I've been doing this for most of the paintings that I've done over the course of the past year, and it accomplishes a number of things, such as sealing in the pencil so that it's less likely to smudge and get into other colors as I go. It's a great way of just getting the painting started, getting some paint on the canvas, because I know most people, it's that first brush stroke that makes people so anxious, like, oh, where do I begin? Well, if we just begin like this, then before we know it, we've begun, right? So the painting is off to the races already. The other thing is it's going to give all of the painting this nice warm glow. I've shown in the past, traditionally what artists do is they would put a warm brown, kind of a earthy, reddish, rusty color over top of the canvas first, rather than a yellow. This is kind of my own thing, right? So you don't have to do this, but traditionally artists would put like a warm brown, especially if you're doing landscape or portrait images, still lifes. And I've shown how, because I've done this a few times where I've painted one with yellow and one with brown, and the results are very similar. Especially for a beginner artist, you're not really going to see much of a difference. So this is just a fast way, paint right out of the tube on the canvas. We've got the first layer, because I also don't really like seeing the white of the canvas coming through. I always just find that makes paintings look a little bit cheap or amateurish. So here now we don't have any white of the canvas left. We've got it all primed with a different color, so that even if there's gaps between the brush strokes, it's going to look really, really nice, right? It's going to look like we've already put a color down, because we have already put a color down. So I'm just going to move this off to the side here while I get some paint on my palette. And if you've been painting with me for a while, you know that I like to use a very limited palette. I use essentially 8 tubes of paint. And if you're wondering what these colors are, there's in the video description below, there's links to buy them if you want them, or just to see what they are. And they are Amazon links. I do find Amazon is generally a little bit higher prices for artist materials than your local art supply store. So support your local art supply store, and rather than Amazon. Amazon doesn't need any more help than it already. Although I buy stuff from Amazon all the time, but again, you probably save a little bit more money if you buy them separately on your own. So let's squeeze a little bit of paint. I usually tell people to put about as much paint on your palette as you'd put toothpaste on your toothbrush, right? Because otherwise, if you put too much paint on your palette, it's going to start drying, right? Acrylic paint dries when it hits the air, right? So if you've got wet paint just sitting on your palette for hour after hour, by the time it comes to actually use it, the paint has changed to a little bit more sticky, stiff texture. It might not be the most pleasant painting experience. So I'm putting white on here. You'll notice I rarely ever use my black paint, right? Black paint, black is such a dominant color, and it always sits right on the surface, Kind of like if you imagine a painting being like a window, black paint is like fingerprints on a window, and it can be kind of hard to so you want to integrate the black better into your overall picture if possible. And so in my paintings, I can mix a color that is almost black using the colors that you see here on the canvas, which I think blows people away, especially younger artists who are just learning to paint, or older artists who are just learning to paint, right? You could be whatever age you want to be when you're learning. And then this is some cool yellow, right? So this is a tube of paint. In fact, let's just cut this open. Since I do this, I'll just show you how I get my extra paint. Now, I have this tool, which I love, that helps get paint out. Right, you see I can get right down here. Let's see if I can actually squeeze any out. No. So we are at the end of this tube. Forgive my little digression here while I do this, but now I can cut it open. And I'm just gonna, let's put it in here. So satisfying. Like, look at all this paint, which would otherwise just go into the garbage because you can't squeeze it out. I mean, that's enough paint for me to make at least 3 other paintings as part of these classes. So, hey, that's great. Right? You could see how many tubes of paint I must have had to get to this point, right? I actually have a big box right underneath here full of tubes of paint that look just like this. Now, these things, you know, can't really be recycled, just unless you use like a lot of soap and water to clean them out. So okay, just gonna clean as I go here. This is my version of Bob Ross beating the devil out of the paintbrush, right? I just slowly wiped the devil off of my spatula. Okay. So, look at that. I love looking at a palette before we've begun the painting, and when it's nice and clean like this, I just feel like the potential energy of what we're about to create, right? We're going to manifest a painting on what once was, just moments ago, a blank surface. We're going to transform that blank canvas into one of the great works of humankind, right? Okay. Just back out a bit. Okay. So it's still a little bit wet, so I'm just going to quickly blow dry this so that we can get started on the painting. So I'm going to mute the microphone momentarily. Okay, so even just before I begin here, this is a little tiny stickler thing, but I noticed, like, I think it's because when I was sanding this canvas, I was a little aggressive, and you can see where there's some of the actual wood or cardboard or whatever's inside these canvas panels. So I'm just going to paint a little bit of white onto these corners where I right? And that's going to dry. And then I'll paint maybe a little bit of yellow back over top of it, or I can just paint the other, whatever other color goes over top later on, and that will disappear. So it's not going to... let's do that one too. Let's do all 4 corners, even though this one doesn't need it. Just since I've established... I like a little bit of symmetry in my life, obviously, right? So I got 4 white corners. I see in the chat there's Paula. Thanks for the bonus class, Michael. You're great. I appreciate that. Heidi says, hi everyone. I love Husain's style. It kind of reminds me of the loose style like Raza's that we did in the last class. Yes, absolutely. Right. So again, if you think of why you know, artists like Husain and Raza form the progressive artist group, is again in the reaction and rejection of the European British style of painting, that realistic style that they were promoting. So it's like they literally sat down and said, what is the opposite of that? What is the opposite of this really careful, deliberate way of painting, this attempt to quote-unquote replicate nature according to these very restrictive sort of set of artistic principles? And part of it is like, let's be more expressive. Let's not worry about perfection like the British were teaching us to do. Let's let loose some of our energy and our passion, the things that we appreciate about our culture. And, you know, Indians are very expressive people, right? Love the dancing and the singing, right? So that's when I think of this, I think of like, this is like, you know, it must have been really, really exciting. And also, I'm sure they ran into a lot of controversy, especially at the very beginning, where you have an old guard, people who are also Indian, who would have seen this thing as like a literal attack on their values, right? Great point. Oh, Heidi was just dragon boating in the pouring rain. Oh my goodness. Yeah, here in Vancouver, it is nasty outside. It is raining like buckets of water out there. I was taking out the recycling this morning, and I got absolutely soaked in like the 20 steps to the alley. Okay, so let's take a look at this painting now that we've got our canvas ready to work on. What should we do next? Now, I'm going to probably... Actually, let's paint this lime green color first. Let's get that in, because then we can do some of this scrubbing of darker color over top later on. Okay, so to make that lime green color, let's switch brush. I'm going to use maybe I'm going to go down a size of brushes just a little bit, right? So let me, so I just used this big brush to do the yellow, right, to get this yellow. So instead, I'm going to go down just a little bit smaller, because I think one of the features of his art, you can see here, is the brush strokes. Just like Raza had, like, those brush strokes are very visible. I'm going to use a smaller brush to get the background in. Now, I could go even smaller than this. So let's go even smaller than that, because that way I'll ensure that my brush strokes aren't hidden, that they're very visible. Now maybe before I just do that, I'm just gonna touch up these corners, which I put that yellow on. Just to integrate them a little bit more, so that they don't stand out when I put this next color on there. In fact, they're almost a little bit too white, so I'm just taking if they're a little too white, I'm just taking actual raw yellow from my tube and painting those. I know it's super stickler kind of thing, but you know, if you're gonna do it, you're make a little mistake here and there, then I just want to show you that you could fix it and it disappears really quickly, and then we can move on. So I'm just gonna blow dry my canvas again. Oops, I'm gonna mute the microphone. Okay, so let's mix this lime green color. So that lime green color is a cool combination of cool yellow and cool blue. So let's take some cool yellow. It's going to be mostly cool yellow. Let's take a little bit of cool blue. Mix this together here. Right, in fact, if anything, it could have been a little bit more yellow. Let's take a bit more here. Now I'm anticipating maybe needing to mix this color a second time, but I'll just leave it like, actually let's make it a little bit brighter even. I think that's closer. So I might need to mix this again. Rather than making a giant batch, I'm going to allow for the possibility of this color being a little bit different the second time around. Right, so the other thing, I always use a big brush whenever I'm doing this type of work, but especially in a painting like today, in a style like Husain's, I really want to capture like all this kind of the spontaneous aspect of his paintings, this big brush strokes, confident mark making. So how about I'll zoom in for a little moment here. Now you notice I'm painting over some of the things that I outlined, which is typical. Right, we don't want to think of like the outline as something that that is restrictive. It's there to help us, but we can move beyond it if we want. Right? And in fact, I encourage you to not become too reliant on it so you know, I can still see some of those lines coming through here. Now as I look at it, I think, oh, I might need a little bit smaller brush to get into some of these areas, but I'll come back to that once I kind of do the main areas. Oops. Well, I guess we're kind of there. So let's just Go right across here. So let's start now looking closely to see if there's areas we missed. So it looks like there's... I'm going to paint this in, even though I think this is going to get darker. And it's a different green, but I'm going to paint this here because then I can just paint that other green over top. It looks like there's a bit of... Yeah, I think this is what he did anyway, so... Because I'm also running out of this paint, so I kind of like doing a little bit of this dry brushing almost on here. Alright, so I'm just about out of this paint, which is fine. If I want, I could mix some more, but I think we'll be good. Okay. So he's kind of like using this color almost as a shading device as well, which is interesting. Most people would think of using black or gray to shade. I see like underneath the armpits and of the, I guess underneath the, yeah, I guess kind of like an armpit. Tigers have an armpit, right? Or leg pit? What would you call that? Yeah, I'm just going to use this big brush for these little details. Just like that. Okay, so let's just zoom back out and just take a little moment and see how we're doing. And again, if I wanted this background to be a little bit more solid and unified, then what I would do is make another mixture of paint and paint over top of it. But I think that's okay like this. You know, the color's not exactly the same, but it's pretty darn close, right? I think reason why it's maybe a little bit lighter than maybe I expected is because there is some warm yellow underneath all of that color to begin with, right? Okay. So let's just clean up a little bit as we go. Good to see lots of people watching today on a usually I don't paint on Saturdays at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'm glad there's so many people here joining us. Probably a bunch of people that have never painted with me before or ever seen me before, so if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, because often I'm doing paintings on my irregular schedule. So usually I'm painting Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. Pacific time here on the west coast of North America. So I would love for you to join me on any one of those episodes coming up. Again, all of next week we're looking at the art of Pablo Picasso. We're going to look at 5 of his most famous paintings of all time. And so I'm pretty excited about that, because that's something people have been asking for a long time. So we're finally getting around to that after 142 episodes of looking at other artists from around the world. I know Picasso is one of the most famous artists of all time, but I made sort of this strategic decision thinking, like, let's look at some of the other artists that I think are maybe even better than Picasso, that people should know beyond this most famous person, right? Okay, I'm sufficiently caffeinated. Let's think about the next color. Since I just mixed this cool green, this color here is a cool green, this lime green, right? Because it had cold yellow and cold blue in it. This color in here is this kind of aquamarine teal color. Is basically the exact same color here, but with some white and probably a little bit more of the cold blue. So I think let's do that. And even before I do this, I just need to get a little bit more cold yellow onto my palette. So let's just take more of that. So let's mix this color again. Maybe I'm going to do it over here. Let's take some cold blue, so cold yellow and cold blue. I'm going to mix this together. We're going to get a cold green. All right, this one's going to be a little bit more on the bluish side of things. Now let's take some white, mix this in. You're like, oh, but that's really very green. That's okay. That just tells us that we need a little bit more blue in this color. So let's add a little bit more blue and see what the results are here. And I don't know, that's pretty close. Maybe just a little bit more blue. Still a little bit on the green side. Let's take more blue. I think that's the color we're looking for. Okay. And I think I'm going to have to go down to a smaller brush to get into some of these details. So I'm just going to take the paint right off of this brush. And there we go. So let's zoom in. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put a little bit more white into this color here. as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, oh, you know, I probably could have painted some black lines in first before I started doing this. So I'm just going to leave little gaps where some of these lines are. The other thing too is look how I'm holding my paintbrush. I'm holding it pretty far from the point, from the bristles, right? And I would strongly encourage you, if you're painting today's painting, to just experiment and just try doing this. You don't have to do the whole painting like it, but just if you're studying this master's art, it wouldn't hurt just to step into their shoes just for a few moments and just feel like what it's like to paint with a brush that's a little bit further away than the tip. Now you're probably going to say, well, I'm going to lose some control. It's really hard to do that. I'm not going to be very happy with the results. Well, you might surprise yourself. And the second thing is, yeah, of course you're going to lose a little bit of control, but that's one of the reasons why artists do that. And so that, well, but why? Why would an artist want to lose control? Then doesn't mean the work's going to get a little sloppy, and it's like, well, I don't know if I would say sloppy, but it might be more expressive, right? And letting go is something some of us have a really hard time doing, right? And maybe that's the universe telling you that it's time to let go a little bit and just not be quite so hard on yourself. Right? And so artists like Husain here can inspire us to give up a little bit of control in the way we approach maybe just painting, but maybe in other parts of our life, right? And take life a little bit less seriously, relax. Right? Get up just a few minutes earlier so that you can kind of take your time getting to work. Maybe take a little bit of time during your lunch hour instead of sitting at your desk and working, but maybe to go for a walk and get some fresh air, smell the flowers. Now you can see he painted over some of these lines, so I think afterwards, after I put some of those darker lines, I might come back with this color and do a little bit. Okay, I think I've got that, or all that I need, at least at this moment, at this stage. I think it's all there. Right? Okay. So how about let's move on. To people having conversations about the dragon boats. Is there a dragon boat festival this year? I know that things, because of the pandemic, a lot of normal festivals and routines were delayed or outright canceled. But I know here in Vancouver there was a pretty active dragon boat festival and competitions in False Creek, which is the kind of one of the waterfronts around Vancouver. Okay, so let's look at the next color. Which should be the next color? How about How about we go right over here and go to, so we're painting with some cool colors. Why don't we, or, you know what, instead of painting the next, you know, I think I'm going to do this darker line right now, and because I was just talking about it. So let's do that. So to get this dark line that we see outlined throughout the entire painting, what we want to do is we're going to take some cold blue and some warm red and mix that together. This gives us basically our darkest color possible. It can get even darker if we add a little bit of cold yellow to it, and that will take it into a very, very dark gray. But I think he's got a little bit of a bluish purple quality to that line, so much so that I'm actually going to take a bit more blue. I could get even more blue out of the tube, but I think that's... or should I get more blue out of the tube? I think this will be fine. As my grandfather always used to say, good enough for government work, right? So even though I could spend some time trying to perfect it, I'm pretty happy with the way it is, right? I'm just going to accept life as it is and continue painting. So I'm going to take this brush, and how about let's zip over to zoom in, and we're going to work from the left of the painting. Yeah, now I look at it, maybe this purple might just be a little too much warm red in it, but yeah, you know what? As much as I want to accept the world as it is, I do think, like, well, if, you know, don't sweat the small stuff, but if the small stuff isn't, it's not like I'm going to be stressed about it, right? We can just add a little bit more cold blue into this paint here. Let's try this again. A little bit closer to that. So let's just go around and we'll outline things. And we can be, again, very loose about the way that we do this. Right? You can allow the paint to get thicker and thinner. Because he also, after painting, his colors in there would have gone over, and you can see a few places where he touched it up and add a little bit more of this darker color. You know, now that I'm looking at it, I think he may have even painted this color first before even putting that lime green down. I'm not entirely sure. Oh, this is down here. Okay. That's okay. I misunderestimated things a bit. And if you're not happy with any of these lines, remember you can always get rid of them by just painting a little bit of white over top of it, changing, you know, and that will just hide it, let it dry, paint another color, maybe the yellow we had down there before, and boom, it's gone. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It's helpful to kind of see the full animal here rather than painting it in parts, right? So I'm just going to finish this tiger off just to the point of even getting this tail in. And then maybe there's a little bit. Let's come back and start the monkey now. So this is actually going to look really kind of, I think, pretty nice after we get all of these lines on it and we start painting over it, which is, again, it's going to be something that's going to be hard for some people, is to leave it a little bit rough, like the way that he has, right? I mean, I find it difficult. I don't know about anybody else, but that's one of the great lessons I take from an artist like this, is allowing the sort of rawness of the painting to stand. You know, like, artists are kind of almost by nature kind of contrarian people, right? And so you can see, like, as soon as India had its independence, and artists like this said, okay, the doors are wide open. What could we do that is just that we're not supposed to do? What is it we've been told all these years makes for a bad painting, right? Because here we've been told by the British that our culture isn't civilized, and they've come in here and introduced all these different ways of going about things. Well, what if we take it for granted that our culture is fine just as it is? What would we do differently? And this much more loose style, I think, is the result of that investigation into how to express themselves as independent people. While also, you know, you could say, well, India obviously had an art of its own for centuries, a thousand years before the British came and took over. So why not return to that style of painting, as some did? Some artists did go back to earlier styles of art. But again, as young artists tend to do, it's like they wanted to look forward rather than back in time. Because India, like a lot of places, like in China and Korea, Japan, Pakistan, or what became Pakistan, traditionally, you know, the art was quite meticulous. You know, famously, like miniature painting in India was a big thing. But I think part of that tradition was kind of co-opted by Europeans, and it was kind of became a bit of like a style, like a thing that the British tourists would buy when they came. You know, and so it was kind of, I think, seen as a bit of like retrograde. It's like, well, yeah, that there's an element of traditional Indian art in there, but it's the kind of thing that the British tourists wanted. Like, what is something that maybe they don't want at all? What is something that no one expects us to do? Like, how can we make a complete separation? Now, what is this thing that I'm painting right here that's going to have this kind of warm blue with white in it? That is a question that, like, that I don't think that we see that elsewhere in the painting. So when we zoom back out, we'll take another look at it. But I wonder what it's supposed to be. Is it a... Because it kind of looks like a tusk, but you painted the tusk white. So is it like a spear, or is it a... I don't know what it is. I think as we zoom back out of the painting shortly here, because we're almost done the outlining, maybe we'll be able to have a clearer idea of what we're looking at. So, I think I've got everything on here. Let's just zoom back out and take a look. So, that's pretty cool. I like this painting a lot. The composition, I think, is really cool. It's pretty wild. It's very, like, we see all these animals all tangled up together. And so I wasn't able to find the story behind this painting, but if it's titled The Spirit of India, well, then obviously we start thinking about the fact that India is a fairly cosmopolitan culture where we have people from lots of different backgrounds all intended to be integrated into one country, right? Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, so and probably a few other cultures in there as well. Buddhist, Jewish. So, you know, potentially these animals are intended to symbolize the diversity of people in the country and how they're kind of interwoven together, but potentially also there's a little bit of conflict when that might happen as well. So let's if we take a look at this, do we have everything in here? This potentially we might have missed a few things. So I think we'll continue. In fact, before my blue completely dries up, the one that I painted the elephant with, I'm going to zoom back in and just go back over some of these lines with this color. Right? Because it's almost dry, but let's just... You could see that he painted it and then may have gone over a little bit. So I want to just hint at that a little bit. And it's okay if a little bit of this wet paint starts to smudge a bit. This feels so cool. I love doing this kind of thing. Really just immersing myself in another artist's technique, and it just feels like so much, so free. Like, it's so interesting that this style, like, there's a freedom to painting in the style that just seems so conceptually aligned to people who have just achieved freedom, right? There's what beautiful kind of synchronicity there. I think is very, very cool. Right, if you do feel like you've gone too far, well, we still have that color, and you can paint that color back on afterwards, right? Okay, so let's now go over to the tiger here. I'm just going to clean up some brushes that have been sitting here for a moment. Get them out of the water so that the bristles don't deform. I also, again, I clean these brushes at the end of the session, after having used them for a painting, because they will get, even though I've just roughly cleaned them, I'll use a little bit of soap and water. Now I used to use all the time the special brush cleaning soap, but for a while I've just been using regular soap, like dish soap, which is really great for cleaning your brush very thoroughly. The only thing is it might be almost a little bit too strong for some brushes, particularly if you have really nice brushes. If you're spending like $60 on a really nice brush, and some people are like, $60? I spent $2 on this one. Yeah, you could spend $1,000 on a really, really handmade brush. But if you're going to use a really, really nice brush, you probably want to take care of it and add there's conditioners in special artist soap, which, just like hair conditioner, not only clean the brush, but also keep the softness of because really expensive brushes aren't just synthetic plastic, they're hair, right? They're horse hair or rabbit hair, right? There's different kinds of brushes, and so just like we condition our hair, or some people do, you might want to think of using a brush conditioner on your brush. But if you're just using plastic cheap brushes from Walmart or wherever, like I am, there's not really a need to do that. With the nice brushes I have, I do take care of them nicely, but these cheap brushes, it's a little bit overkill. So let's mix the color for this tiger here. Now this warm yellow is going to work quite well. It's almost there. Let's take a little bit of warm yellow and mix this in. Or sorry, a little bit of warm red, I mean. And that's just going to get us a little bit more of an orangey color. Right, so I mean, because that's basically the warm yellow with a lot of water in it, of course, but this gets us a little bit closer to the color that we see in the painting. And again, you can see this gives me now a little bit of freedom just to be kind of pretty wild with the way that I'm painting it. And even though that's not there in his painting, since I kind of goofed there, I'm going to try to integrate it into my painting a little bit. Rather than just try to fix it and paint over it, it's like, well, maybe there's a way of keeping that in my painting. And rather than thinking of it as a mistake, but as an opportunity. Okay, let's move down. Wonder who's actually making this painting with me today, because I know many people are painting their own paintings and are just hanging out, which is totally fine. I think that's really cool, and I'm glad to have those of you here just hanging out with me. And I know there's some people that actually use the time and paint with me what I'm painting. So no judgments. So let's just show you what I was just doing here, painting this tail. Come back here and grab these feet. Yeah, there's a bit of that darker blue in here. Let's just wipe a bit of it away. I don't mind it being there, but I think that might be just a little bit nicer. Okay. So, let's clean this brush. I've got my front-facing camera, or light there, has been dying on me. So let me just go change this battery. There we go, a little bit brighter. So I got a new light arriving tomorrow. And thank you to those people who donated to the show, because that's where the money goes. It goes right back into the show to help improve different things like the microphone. If you go back a year ago and you listen to some of those videos, like some of the microphone, I was trying these cheap little lapel microphones, which are restrictive, and I finally used the money that was donated to the show to improve the show. So thank you again, all of those of you who throughout the past year have been so generous with your contributions. So let's look at this monkey now. So this monkey is using a cool red. So let's take this cool magenta and some cool, or sorry, cool white, just white, although there is such thing as a cool and warm whites. There's a little bit too much white in there. Close, maybe almost still a little too much white, so I'm just keep on moving it to the side here. I think that's pretty close. Yeah, let's use a bigger brush for this. You know what? I think I'm going to go back to a bit more of the more white in this pink, because there is the warm yellow underneath this color, which is darkening the pink a bit. actually a bit of like a purple in that pink now that I'm looking at it more and more. So you could put a little bit of warm blue into this color, and I think you'd get a little bit closer to the original. But I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's okay. Now, obviously, I've painted over some of those lines, so I'll paint those back in momentarily, but I'm just going to wait for a few minutes. I'll let that dry, because there's still other things I need to do here anyway, like painting this, the face of the lion, the tusk of the elephant, etc. So I see in the comment there, Paula says, I'm painting along as usual, yet I find it hard to follow the lines. I'm not exactly sure I know what you mean, Paula, but you know, it might have been helpful to paint these darker lines in first, and then so if you haven't painted your darker lines, that might be helpful to do now, and that way you can see which colors go in which shapes. But again, think of, like, you can certainly embrace Husain's real looseness with the way he paints, and don't worry about making it perfect, right? I get the feeling when I look at his art that perfection is sort of the absolute last thing on his mind. That it's not that he doesn't, and when I say that, I'm not saying that he's lazy or sloppy or ignorant or stupid or incompetent. I mean that it's just not something that is integral to the creation of art, right? I've said it many times. Perfection is the enemy of art, right? That the more focused you are on making something perfect, the more rigid and stiff the painting is going to become. So use this as an opportunity to let go a little bit, to embrace the way that Husain was letting go of some of the restrictive nature of the style of painting in which he began. Heidi says, I wonder if he sketched out the lines first. I do think he probably I'm sure did he draw it out or just went? It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't even use a pencil on canvas, that he just started painting with his brush. I would say that that's quite likely, that in order, again, to get just even more of a loose style of painting. But I do think that he probably did these dark lines before he did the colors inside the shapes of these animals, but even potentially before he did this lime green around the outside edge. It's really hard to say. So which should we, I think we're going to look at this warm blue here. So to do that, I'm going to take this warm blue, get a bit on my brush, and take some white. And you can see there's a little bit of other color in there. I'm not too concerned about that. That's pretty good. I do think there might be just a smidgen of cool red in there. Oops, got a little bit dark. I'm gonna allow myself to leave little bits of white or the canvas showing through here. I think this is the same color that's on this tusk. Okay. Next up, we've got some white. So, although that white, it does look like it's got a bit of a brownish quality to it. So, in order to make a kind of a brownish white, let's make a bit of a brown first, right? So let's take our warm yellow, a bit of warm red, and a bit of warm blue. We're going to make this brown, right? So we got a nice brown there. Now, let's take lots of white. That's good. Might even be a little bit not quite as colored as this. Might be a little bit lighter, but I'm just going to use it. And so let's start. Again, I'm using this big brush. Let's go right here. Which is reducing my level of accuracy. But is that a problem? I don't know. I don't know if it's actually a problem or a gift. So I'm going to come back with a brush and adjust some things here. Or with that darker color, I'll finish that outlining. I know it doesn't look exactly like the original, but that should also be your invitation to have to embrace a little bit more freedom in this painting yourself, right? Okay. So I think I've got all of the main aspects of this painting in. I'm going to go back to my darker color, right, that I used for my outlines, which was a little bit of warm red and mostly cool blue. Because I can get even darker, but I did that, went a little bit too dark, so I've been adding a bit more warm blue back into the paint. So now we can kind of go back to the tiger's face here. I just want to also widen that. And there can be a little bit of back and forth. I might do a bit of these outlining lines, and then I might come back and do a little bit more white over top of them. Right? It doesn't always have to be just a one-way street here. So now I'm just gonna go around the picture and go back over any dark lines that I feel like need a little bit more, but I'm not gonna go over every line, right? Just a few of them, because I like seeing some of these lines that are covered by the other colors. Right, you can almost use it as like a shadow, like the way that I'm doing here, the bottom sides of those fingers. Okay. I think I'm pretty happy with the tiger so far, so let's now go over to the monkey here. Yeah, again, like my color of my monkey is a bit different than his monkey. But that's totally okay. After we're done this step, we're gonna go into adding a little bit of this. I think I'll do it as a glaze. The darker color that's over top. Kind of in these areas here, he kind of scrubbed that in. I love that. So we'll do that next here. I haven't forgotten about it. But I do feel like it's probably one of the final steps that he did as well. I mean, it takes a lot of restraint to not put these dark lines everywhere. Okay. And I do now, yeah, so this is definitely two separate canvases here that he joined together to create this painting, which is, again, another interesting little step in the process. Joining two canvases together, because he, at this point is, world famous. He could have easily have gotten one big canvas, but he decided not to. So why would he do that? Why would he decide that he needed to make this painting on two canvases that were joined together? Maybe that's going all the way back to 50 years before he made this painting, to the partition of India into two separate countries. Am I reading too much into it? I don't know. I don't know. But this is entitled The Spirit of India. So, not everyone was happy that India was split into two, right? There were certain people who said India, should be one big country, and that, dividing it into two separate countries was problematic. Now, if you ask the people who live in Pakistan, the majority of whom are Muslim, they would say, thank goodness we were able to have some separation. Now we have our own country, because we were minorities in a larger country within India. So there was lots of bloodshed, and it was a very difficult time for the people of India and Pakistan. I just can't find the size of this painting. I did have the size where, I think it's in the, let me, so we look at the size of this canvas is 35 by 50 inches. Basically, almost, it's over 1 meter wide and almost 1 meter tall. So this is a pretty big canvas that he created. Yeah, so you're kind of like basically probably arm's length, or my arm's length, and then just a little bit. So, it's a lot of his paintings are quite big. Same thing with Raza and Tiameta. I think, again, it's hard to be very expressive on a small canvas, right? When you're painting on a large canvas where you kind of got to spread your legs apart and your body is moving over the surface, you could feel how, because that's the way he's painting on this painting. He's got a big brush, probably this whole painting is painted with brushes at least this size, right? This is, you can see it's 2 fingers wide, right? So you can imagine him making this painting and painting in big brush, very physical sort of form of painting, and how immersive that would feel, as opposed to the style of painting that was dominant at the time, where it's tiny little brush strokes, right? And some people watching right now love painting a little bit more expressively, and some people are like, ooh, I don't know, it's just I want a little bit more focus, more clarity. That's the good thing about trying out different styles. Okay, so we're almost done here. The next and final step is a little bit of glazing here. And I'm just trying to think of how I want to do this. Because the way that he's going about that process is, I get the sense that he's painting, he's also scrubbing paint away. You can see right here, there was some paint there. It was obviously much darker, and he scrubbed so much of it away, he went back down to the white of the original canvas. Same thing it looks like in here. So, and this is, I'm pretty sure this is painted on with oil paint, right? Oh, it's acrylic. Interesting. Interesting. Acrylic on canvas. So let's see if we can replicate this. I think I'm going to go to a larger brush. We'll get some glazing fluid. It's a good idea to shake up some of these fluids, because there's these mediums can settle and separate a little bit. So this is satin glazing liquid. You can use gloss glazing fluid, but I prefer matte always. If I want something glossy, I'll do that at the very end of the painting process as maybe a varnish. But typically I prefer a matte. Now, I'm the minority there. Most people prefer glossy paintings. I always find glossy acrylic tends to look very plasticky. So I that's one of the, because I have been for the past 20 years an oil painter, and oil paints tend to be fairly matte, except when you varnish them at the very end. If you do varnish, most people don't varnish their paintings anymore, but it's a whole other thing. Anyway, so I got my glazing fluid. I've kind of inundated my brush with glazing fluids. Now let's get a bit of this dark color on here and scrub this in. And let's see, this might be enough. That might even be a little too, well, we'll see. And even, before I even do that, I'm just going to take, I've got a little rag here, and I might use this to actually scrub things away. So I might paint. So in fact, let's do this, and let's paint in this same area where I said that he probably scrubbed some things away. So let's do a little bit of that, right? So he painted something in here and then might have taken his rag and kind of, see how we get a bit of that white back in here. Right, scraping all the way through those layers of paint that have supposedly dried, but obviously not quite enough. So I might have to do a couple layers of this. And maybe just so I can just speed up the process, let's just get a bit more paint on here. And maybe I can soften that up with just a dabbing on there. Right, and I can again take my rag. Maybe let's look at a different angle here. Right, so I can take this, I'll just do that again. Right, maybe we'll need to go a little bit darker. Let's just let that dry while I move on. Again, it looks like he did something like this. And then took his rag and wiped away. He took his rag, wiped things away. So I'm just wrapping, like I take my finger and just wrap a little bit of it like that, and then I can just kind of go in and soften that area up if I want. Okay, let's keep on going. So actually I went and got a little bit more paint to glaze ratio here, and just I didn't mean to put so much paint on, but I was like, oh, you know, since I've done that, let's just go back around a bit here. And unlike normally, if I was to do this, I'd be like, oh, let's go, don't paint back into these areas where I've got wet glaze, because it's gonna kind of behave poorly. In this instance, it actually is gonna work and do exactly what I want and give it a bit of a rougher, wilder quality, right? So what is like totally frustrating, wrong, something that messes up another painting is exactly what we want to do in this painting, right? So just because a technique doesn't work on one style doesn't mean it can't work on another style of painting. You can always just take your rag and just soften or blur. Like I'm not just wiping paint away, but sometimes I'm kind of smudging it a bit. Okay. So adding a bit more glazing fluid here. Putting a bit of it on the inside too. It doesn't have to be just an outside contouring kind of thing. Right, like we can see this whole area. You could see he basically did exactly what I'll do right here. He got all of this paint here, maybe even went right up to the edge. Made it pretty, and then decided, you know what, I'm gonna like wipe a bunch of this away. Right, and so now we get this effect that's pretty subtle of not just the background color, but we've got some other color kind of mixed into it and complicating things a bit. Let's just keep on going. It's going to get darker here in a moment, but let's just kind of go around. Maybe the great thing with glazes is it's great for beginner artists who might be a little bit afraid of going too dark too quickly. So we can take a rag and scrub around. let's get a little darker in here. So I've got glazing fluid. Let's just get a bit more paint. And again, every time I usually use glazing fluid, I would do one layer and then I'd use the blow dryer, right? And if I didn't, you've heard me kind of getting frustrated at myself because it usually punishes me because I'm kind of taking some paint away. So here I'm doing the exact opposite of what I normally do, because the look it gives me this kind of weathered quality that I really, really like. And of course is much closer to his own approach. Okay, let's go back in here and get even more of this dark paint on here. Well, that might be a little too much, but we'll see. I'll just kind of show you, kind of also. See, I'm kind of like, I'm not really brushing. I'm kind of more like dabbing, like a bingo dabber, right? As I go around here. And I don't know, maybe even the microphone picks up on this a little bit, is that this kind of tap, 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 as opposed to kind of effect, right? And then I can always just go back in, manipulate anything. Right, again, he's wrapped his finger. Looks like he's gone back in here. Pulled some of that paint back out. Maybe let's, probably be helpful to zoom back out, at least for me anyway, so that I can see the full painting and how all of the marks, especially the most recent marks, are kind of working together here. Okay, I feel like I'm getting pretty close. Now he's reserved this bottom right corner for his signature. I'm just gonna darken it. I'm debating. I was gonna put the line. Maybe I will still put that line down the middle, but let's. I think I might do that after. I might blow dry this. Is that, do I have everything? This, I love, this is my favorite part of making the painting. This is why often at the very end I tend to kind of slow down, because this is where I really like kind of spending my time, which is different. I know not everybody, some people want to avoid the ending of the painting. I was talking the other day about how for me, the end of the painting is sort of like the end of a great book. You don't want to put it down. You want to stay with it. So sometimes that's why I end up kind of in this. Some of these videos can take a little bit longer because I don't want to say goodbye. Realize that there was some. I don't have the whiskers here. Paint's pretty much all dry, so. And so again, just after going around there and doing a bunch of that dabbing, I think, okay, maybe, is there anything that just needs to be brought back out again? I think that's pretty close. Now, I'm just thinking, oh, I was going to do that line down the middle. So, let's, come on. Just clean the brush. So really, you could be done right now. This is just a little bit of bonus stuff to finish the painting off. So I'm going to blow dry it. I'm going to mute the microphone for a moment, and then we'll get this line on here. Okay. Now I can still see my line through here. I just this ruler. This ruler's lost its lines. You can see I've used it so many times. So let's just. So I can see how straight. Yeah, it's pretty much straight, so. Okay. And to do this, I'm going to do this with some glazing. Yeah, let's do a bit of glazing fluid. I'm going to take my dark color, get it on the glazing fluid here. I'm going to try to do this a very, very sharp line. So, let's just zoom in here. Everything should be relatively dry. I mean, super, super subtle, right? Yet, nevertheless, it's there. Which, again, it's like the way that he approached this painting, right? He didn't have to do this. So for him, there's a meaning behind it. And so I'll respect his decision to incorporate this type of an effect in the work. Again, I can see many people probably saying, I don't think I need it in my version, but at least you'll know how to do this if you want to do it. Right, so I keep twirling what I'm doing is I take my paintbrush and I'll do it here is I just twirl it and kind of pull it away. you see how now this brush is over a year old, and I've been using it many times. It's kind of got a bit of a hook to it. I don't necessarily mind that though. Okay. Now, the thing that I want to do here is, I mean, a line is fine, but I think what I want to do is also just to, I'm going to take my glazing fluid and I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to take some more glazing fluid. So what I want to do is just get a little bit more of a subtle blur on one side, especially on the right. Well, I could go on either side, but I'm going to put it on the right side. It's a little bit too subtle. Still a bit too subtle. Still too subtle. I want it to give the look of the canvases bunched up together. Not just a line, but like the little shadow gap between these lines. I know some people will be like, well, Michael, you're being silly here. Wouldn't be the first time someone has said that. But now it's starting to look a little bit more like two canvases. Just this little subtle effect. To the point where we could also accentuate this, because if we look at the original and this kind of crack, we can see how his paintbrush didn't quite make it like this. This is where I was scrubbing before, but how about I'll just do the opposite. Let's just darken that side right up to the line. It's kind of the exact opposite of what he did here, but let's think about any other areas where we could have a bit of a gap like that. And obviously I'm kind of not following exactly his painting everywhere, but so let's just back out and take another look. For that to dry, I think, a little bit. Okay. I think I can feel like I'm done with this painting. Paula says, I ordered a brush from Desir's, should be here next week. It will do a better job for acrylic paintings. I've been using watercolor brushes. It does not put the paint on evenly. Definitely different brushes work better for different purposes, for sure. Heidi says the line may symbolize some kind of a divide, a boundary in a country like India. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit earlier, that the reason why he would have used these two canvases is as a call back to the partition of India in 1947. The Progressive Artist Group formed in December 1947, about, what, 4 months after India separated. So you could see there was this explosion of interest in forging a new direction in all facets of Indian life back in at that particular point in time. Okay. So let's put some signatures on here. Here's my name. Is it the 16th or the 18th? 16th. At the end of these paintings, sometimes my eyes are quite crossed. That's awesome. I feel pretty happy with that. That's cool. It's been fun looking at art by Muslim artists over the past couple of weeks. And I think, you know, it's especially Muslim artists that are more modern artists that have been painting really up until very recently. All three of the well, at least before we did Tala Rator, was it a couple weeks ago. She's still very much alive. She's just a little bit older than I am. But these three artists, Raza, Husain, and Meta, who are all part of, or at least affiliated with, the Progressive Artists Group. And I think it just should be a good eye-opener for some people thinking about, that there's lots of artists who are very well known and incredibly successful, who come from the Muslim faith, right? Because just living in the West, the Islam has not the most positive reputation, right? And certain people have used what some people have done, as justification to marginalize Muslim people, and which is a major shame, because the actions of a very small number of people certainly don't represent the overall feelings and motivations of a billion other people, right? So for me, this has been really exciting to get to spend a little bit of time with a few artists that I really admire, who come from a totally different background than I do, as we've been doing throughout many of these episodes. But anyway, that's really cool. So in a couple of days, we're going to be spending all of next week looking at the work of Pablo Picasso, and probably the most famous artist of all time. So we're going to be looking at his blue period. Some of his, although that's not the earliest work he did, it's certainly kind of where he had his breakthrough with the blue period. And then we're going to look at his rose period, and then we're going to look at the cubist period. We're going to spend a little bit of time with cubism, and then we're going to look at one of his later pieces, where a piece that he made in preparation for Guernica, which is probably his most famous later artwork that he did in his life, right, during World War II. So we'll talk all about that next week. We're also going to do a painting of Bigfoot right in the middle of it, because it is also an important anniversary in the history of Bigfoot. What are we talking about? What? You'll have to tune in on Wednesday, and I think that one might be a very different time as well. I think we might be doing that one at 10 o'clock in the morning, just because of my schedule, my teaching schedule at university. So I hope you're able to join us in a couple of days and paint along with me and look at some of the famous paintings of all time. Thank you, everyone, for painting with me. If you want to contribute to the show, there's the PayPal link down below. You want to send a check or e-transfer, contact me through the Facebook group or through my email on the website. Like and subscribe to the Facebook group. Upload your version of today's painting or any other painting you've been working on. If you want a little bit of feedback, it might be next weekend when we get around to doing one of those episodes. Until then, my friends, we will see you in a few days. Take care. Have a good night, and we'll see you then. Good night, everybody.